I had always been good at keeping things separate. Sex was just sex. It wasn't complicated, it wasn't emotional, and it sure as hell didn't mean anything beyond the moment. Connection? A risk. One I never took. I knew how people got when feelings got involved. Needy, unpredictable, messy. I had spent too much time watching my friends fall apart over people who never deserved it, over relationships that should have ended long before they did. I had made a decision early on. That wouldn't be me. It never had been. Until Rachel. It was one of those Manhattan nights, the kind where the skyline glowed like something out of a dream, where the air buzzed with possibilities and bad decisions. The rooftop bar was packed, a sea of bodies, the hum of conversation blending with the steady pulse of music. Ice clinked in cocktail glasses, laughter cut through the air, and everything smelled like expensive perfume and the promise of something fleeting. I was there with friends, but my attention was elsewhere. It had been from the moment I walked in, from the second I spotted her standing near the edge of the rooftop, a glass of whiskey in her hand, eyes scanning the crowd like she already knew exactly who she was looking for. Rachel. She had the kind of presence that commanded attention without asking for it. Dark hair pulled into a messy bun, stray strands falling loose around her face, sharp cheekbones that caught the city lights just right. Her dress hugged her body in all the ways that mattered, just tight enough to be dangerous, just casual enough to make you wonder if she even cared. But it was her confidence that got me. The way she moved through the crowd like she owned the place, like she had nothing to prove but still held every eye in the room. And when our gazes locked, when that slow, knowing smile tugged at the corner of her mouth, like she had just figured me out before I even said a word, I was already lost. We talked. We drank. We laughed like we'd known each other for longer than a few stolen hours in the middle of a city that didn't care. She was sharp, quick-witted, the kind of woman who didn't just hold a conversation, she challenged it. Every answer was a game, every response a test, and I wanted to see how far I could push. It didn't take long to realize she was doing the same thing to me. Somewhere between the second and third drink, she leaned in just a little closer, her voice dropping like she was about to tell me a secret, even though we both knew there wasn't anyone else worth listening to. So, do you always stare at women from across the room before coming over? Or am I just special? I smirked, swirling the last of my drink in my glass. Depends. Do you always make people work this hard for your attention? Her lips curled at the edges, slow, taunting. Only the ones worth it. That was it. That was all it took. A few more drinks. A few more stolen glances. A few more moments of leaning in just a little too close, of letting our hands brush when they didn't have to. And then we were leaving the bar together, stepping into the warm New York night, her fingers tangled with mine like they belonged there. The next few hours passed in a blur of heat and hands and breathless laughter against my skin. I didn't think. I didn't stop. I just felt her mouth on mine, her fingers sliding under my dress, the way she pulled me closer like she wasn't in any hurry to let go. It was fast. It was reckless. It was exactly what I wanted. And in the morning, it was exactly what I thought it would be. No awkwardness. No misplaced emotions. Just the warmth of her body beside mine, the sheets tangled between us, the soft glow of morning creeping through my window. I didn't linger. Neither did she. She stretched, sighed, grinned like she had won something, and pressed a quick, lazy kiss to my lips before slipping out of bed. That was fun, she murmured, pulling on her dress, fingers working through her hair. Yeah, I agreed because that was all it was supposed to be. At the door, she paused, glancing over her shoulder, her smile still easy, still dangerous. I'll see you around. And then she was gone. I should have forgotten her. I always did. But as I stood there, the echo of her presence still clinging to my apartment, I realized something unsettling. I was still thinking about her. And that was the first sign that I had already lost control. It was supposed to be just one night. One night, no strings, no expectations, nothing more than what it was. That had always been the rule. That was how I kept things simple, how I made sure I never ended up like the people I swore I wouldn't become. The ones who got too attached, who fell too fast, who mistook something temporary for something permanent. But then there was a second night, and a third, and a fourth. Somewhere along the way, Rachel stopped being just another name, another body in my bed, another fleeting moment lost in the haze of a city that never stood still. Somewhere between our first night and the fourth, she became something else. And I wasn't ready for it. Rachel was not like the others. I noticed it in the way she lingered, in the way she stretched moments into something more. With other women, the nights ended as quickly as they began. Heat, hands, tangled sheets, then distance. But Rachel? She didn't just leave after. She stayed. Not because she had to, not because there was some unspoken expectation, but because she wanted to. She was comfortable in my space, like she belonged there, like it was the most natural thing in the world to sit on my kitchen counter and steal bites of my breakfast, to drape herself across my couch like she had always been part of my life. And I let her. The problem was, I didn't just let her. I wanted her to stay. The signs were there. They had always been there. I should have noticed the way she reached for my hand absent-mindedly when we walked side by side, the way her fingers curled around mine like she didn't even have to think about it. I should have paid attention to how her voice dropped just a little lower when she said my name, how her laughter felt like something intimate, something that existed just for me. I should have realized what it meant when silence with her never felt uncomfortable. With other people, silence begged to be filled. With Rachel, it was easy, the kind of quiet that didn't demand anything, the kind that felt like a choice instead of an absence. I should have seen it coming. But instead, I kept pretending. I pretended that it was still casual, that she wasn't different, that the way I started looking forward to seeing her didn't mean anything. I pretended so well I almost believed it. Until the night I couldn't anymore. It happened after yet another night together, a night we weren't calling a date, even though it felt like one. Dinner, drinks, hours spent in conversation that flowed too easily, laughter that came too naturally. Something fragile between us, something we both felt but refused to name. We ended up at my place, as usual. I was sitting on my bed, watching her as she traced her fingers over the rim of her glass, lost in thought. The city buzzed outside, but inside, the air was thick with something else, something I didn't know how to escape. And then she looked at me, not like she usually did. Not with the teasing amusement, the sharp wit, the confident edge she wore so effortlessly. She looked at me like she saw through me, like she had been waiting for me to realize something. Her fingers slid across my wrist, slow, lazy, tracing idle circles against my skin. Her touch was light, but it felt heavy. Too much. Too intimate. Too knowing. "Have you ever wondered," she murmured, voice quiet, "why we keep doing this?" Something in my chest tightened. I tried to ignore it. Tried to act like I didn't understand what she was really asking. So I forced a smirk, let out a slow breath, and said, "Because it's good, simple, logical, safe." Rachel didn't look convinced. She smiled, but it wasn't her usual carefree smirk. It was something softer, something dangerous. "No," she said, tilting her head slightly. "It's more than that." My heart slammed against my ribs. I should have denied it. Should have laughed. Should have teased her. Should have turned it into a joke, the way I always did when things got too real. But I didn't. Because for the first time, I couldn't pretend anymore. For the first time, I knew she was right. I tried to pull away. Tried to convince myself that whatever was happening between us was nothing more than what it had always been. Just a case of a casual fling stretching a little too long, a little too far. I told myself it was just habit, that I was only feeling this way because we had broken the usual cycle of one-night stands and goodbyes. So, I did the only thing that made sense. I stopped texting her. I let the messages pile up, short, unread, ignored. I made excuses to stay late at work, to go home early, to fill the space where she used to be, with anything else. I told myself that if I could just wait it out, the feeling would pass. But it didn't. Instead, it got worse. Because the longer I stayed away, the more I felt her absence like a weight pressing down on my chest. My mornings felt too quiet without her teasing voice in my ear, My bed felt too cold without the imprint of her body still lingering in the sheets. Even my apartment, a space that had always been mine alone, felt unfamiliar without the sound of her laughter bouncing off the walls. But I still refused to admit it. Even as I lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, replaying the way she had looked at me the last time we were together. Even as I picked up my phone a dozen times just to stare at her name, at the messages I never answered. Even as I missed her so much it ached. And then one night, I saw her. And she wasn't alone. I hadn't planned on going out. I told myself I was over it, that I had moved on. But my friends had dragged me to a bar downtown and I had let them, thinking that maybe, just maybe, a few drinks and a loud crowd would help erase the parts of me that still belonged to her. It was working. For a while. And then I saw her. Rachel, sitting at the bar, her head tilted toward another woman, her smile easy, relaxed. The kind of smile I had thought was mine. The sight of it hit me like a punch to the gut. Sharp, sudden, unforgiving. I had no right to feel this way. We weren't together. There had never been any promises, never any rules about who she could or couldn't be with. I had spent weeks convincing myself that she didn't mean anything to me. So, why did it feel like the ground had just disappeared beneath me? Why did it feel like I was losing something I had never even let myself claim? I could have walked away. I should have. I should have turned around, down my drink, let the night swallow me whole. I should have ignored the way my pulse was hammering in my throat, the way my hands clenched into fists at my sides. But I didn't. Instead, I found myself crossing the room, moving toward her before I even knew what I was going to say. Rachel saw me before I spoke, her gaze flickering toward me, something unreadable passing through her expression. I stopped in front of her, barely aware of the other woman still sitting beside her, watching the moment unfold. "We need to talk." The words left my mouth before I could stop them. Rachel's lips parted slightly, as if considering her response. Then, without a word, she turned to the woman next to her and murmured something soft, something dismissive, before she stood up. And just like that, it was just us. The cold air outside was a shock to my system. We stood there, just beyond the glow of the bar's neon lights, the distant hum of traffic filling the silence between us. Rachel shoved her hands into the pockets of her coat, her head tilting slightly, studying me the way she always did, like she was already 10 steps ahead, like she already knew what I was going to say before I did. I swallowed, trying to gather myself, but the words spilled out anyway. I think I hesitated, my breath catching in my throat. I think I screwed everything up. Her expression didn't change, but something in her posture shifted. "How so?" she asked, voice quiet, patient. I dragged a hand through my hair, my pulse pounding in my ears. "Because," I exhaled, frustrated with myself, with her, with everything. "Because I think I like you." For a second, she didn't say anything. And that second was enough for my stomach to drop, for my mind to race through every worst-case scenario. But then she smiled. Slow. Knowing. Like she had been waiting for this moment all along. I already knew that. My heart stumbled over itself, my breath catching somewhere between disbelief and something dangerously close to relief. I stared at her. "And you?" Rachel stepped forward, closing the space between us with deliberate ease, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was just waiting for you to figure it out." The truth was simple. I had spent so much time avoiding attachment, so much time convincing myself that I could keep things casual, controlled, easy, that I hadn't even noticed when I had already fallen. Somewhere between the nights that weren't supposed to mean anything, the touches that lasted a second too long, the stolen glances that carried more weight than I wanted to admit, I had lost the battle without even realizing I was fighting one. And now Rachel was standing in front of me, waiting, not pushing, not demanding, just waiting. The city buzzed around us, horns blaring in the distance, the low hum of conversation spilling from the bar's open door, footsteps echoing against the pavement, but all I could hear was the rapid pounding of my own heartbeat. Rachel stood just a few feet away, bathed in the soft, flickering glow of a neon sign, her breath visible in the crisp night air. She was calm, unreadable, but there was a quiet intensity in her gaze, a stillness that felt like a challenge, a test. And I knew what she was waiting for me to choose, for me to stop running. She had already given me the answer, already laid it all out in front of me when she had said, with that infuriating, knowing smile, "I was just waiting for you to figure it out." And now, here she was, waiting to see if I would follow through. She lifted her hand. A small movement. A simple invitation. No words. No pressure. Just a choice. I stared at it, my pulse hammering in my throat, my chest tight with something I didn't know how to name. If I took it, everything would change. If I didn't, well, that wasn't an option anymore. Because I knew myself. I knew I could walk away. I could turn, disappear into the night, go back to my carefully curated life where nothing ever touched me too deeply, where no one ever got too close. I could pretend that this was just another moment, just another woman I would eventually forget. But the problem was, I wouldn't forget. Because Rachel wasn't just another woman. She was the only one I had ever met who had made me want to stay. The only one who had seen through every single one of my excuses, every single one of my carefully built walls, and still stood there, offering me something real. Something terrifying. Something I wanted. I swallowed hard, every muscle in my body tensed with indecision, my fingers twitching at my sides. Rachel didn't move, didn't say a word, just watched me, patient and unwavering, like she already knew what I was going to do. And maybe she did. Because when I finally exhaled, when I closed the space between us and slipped my fingers into hers, I felt it. The soft squeeze of her hand, the warmth of her palm, the way she let out a quiet breath like she had been holding it all this time. And when I looked up, she was smiling. Slow. Knowing. Like she had been waiting for this moment all along. Like she had been waiting for me. And for the first time in my life, I didn't run.